Today is Monday, December the 18th, is 2023. This is Parshat Vayigash. Vayigash, the third of the four Parshiot dealing with the story of Joseph. Very emotional passage, and this in the Parsha where last week concluded. Just a second, you have to turn off the video. You have to where last week ended. We had so the end of the Parsha was a cliffhanger because Judah was Benjamin had already been framed with the silver goblet, and our Parsha begins with Judah really begging Joseph to let Benjamin to be released. Judah had already pledged himself as collateral, basically, for Joseph. And so Judah makes this great plea before Joseph. And I checked the class that we did a couple of years ago, and we looked at that, and we looked at the extent to which Jacob deploys language in his speech to Joseph. It's really one of the longest speeches in the entire Torah. And he encodes in that speech so many references to his father, my father, my father, my father. It's not clear if that's the trigger that makes Joseph lose whatever composure he loses. I mean, there's so many things that are building up here. That's certainly one of them. Where I want to pick up the text today is simply in that scene, and we may have studied it before. It's really the most powerful scene of the entire story. It's the climactic scene of the whole story, which is Joseph reveals himself to his brothers. So let's take a look at what happens in that scene. We'll read it through and see if we can read, as we've been doing, through the text and try and understand what it's saying as it explains everything, as the Torah compresses for us all of this language. There are things that are being stated there within the language because of the references to other places in the Bible and because of other things that are happening there. We get the depth of that scene. So I'm going to share the screen here. And here we go. All right, so this is the where it starts. It's chapter 45, verse 1. Joseph could no longer restrain himself. V'lo yachol Yosef litapek. He couldn't restrain himself. L'chol hanitzavim alav, in the presence of all who were stationed around him, he called out, "Have everyone leave me." So no one stood in attendance upon him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. He put forth his voice in weeping. The Egyptians heard, and Pharaoh's household heard. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" But his brothers were not able to answer him, for they were terrified before him. Joseph said to his brothers, "Pray, come close to me." They came close. He said, "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. But now do not be pained, and do not let upset be in your eyes that you sold me here. For it was to save life that God sent me on before you. For it is 2 years now that the famine has been in the midst of the land, and there are still another 5 years in which there shall be no plowing or harvest. So God sent me on ahead of you to make you a remnant on earth, to keep you alive as a great body of survivors. So now it was not you that sent me here, but God. He has made me father to Pharaoh and lord of all his household and ruler over the land of Egypt. Make haste Go up to my father and say to him, thus says your son Yosef, God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not remain. You shall stay in the region of Goshen. You shall be near me, you and your sons, and the sons of your sons, your sheep, your oxen, and all that is yours. I will sustain you there, for are still 5 years of famine left, lest you be as disinherited, you and your household and all that is yours. Here your eyes see, as well as my brother Binyamin's eyes, that it is my mouth that speaks to you. So tell my father of all the weight that I carry in Egypt, and all that you have seen, make haste, bring my father down here. He flung himself upon his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept upon his neck. Then he kissed all his brothers and wept upon them. After this, the brothers spoke with him. The news was heard in Pharaoh's household. They said, Joseph's brothers have come. It was good in Pharaoh's eyes and in the eyes of his servants. Joseph could know. Okay, so that's where we're going to stop here. It's really the first scene. Okay, I'm going to just go back up a little bit. I wish I had the visual here, a kind of picture, but here is the scene is Joseph could no longer restrain himself in the presence of all who were stationed. He has everybody leave. He says, I'm Joseph, and there's crying, etc. We're going to look at everything under the magnifying glass in a second. But there's one basic piece of information that I'm going to start with, because it's fresh in my mind, because I was really concerned with, I really dealt with this over last week. And it has to do with the propositional content of the passage, which is what is supposed to happen based on this moment. What is supposed to happen based on this moment is that everybody's supposed to come down. This is where Joseph then states to everyone, come down now, you are coming down to Egypt. I'm focusing on this just briefly at the beginning here, because this is the resolution of a biblical problem based on the two other precedents of famines in the land of Canaan. I pointed this out on my Parsha sheet last week. There are two other famines that happen, a famine in the life of Abraham and a famine in the life of Isaac. In the famine in the life of Abraham, Abraham takes upon himself to go down without any instruction from God. In the famine of the life of Isaac, God tells him not to go down. You are to stay put. When we saw the brothers at the beginning of last week's Parsha, where they don't know what to do, or when the famine is started, they don't know what to do. Part of their deliberation is a political moment in the family's life. There's nobody making decisions. They're not ready to make decisions, and Jacob hasn't yet made the decision about whether to go on. But finally, the famine is so intense, Jacob turns to the brothers and says, what are you looking at each other for? Go down. You got to go down. And we looked at some of that last week. So I mentioned last week that it's Jacob who makes the statement to go down. But those were only temporary dislocations. The brothers go down, they go to purchase food, they bring it back, they have difficulty, of course, they're left Shimon there as a hostage, and they come down a second time to get more food, but to bring Benjamin with them, and they're basically framed up now and held completely as hostage. And it's at this moment, in the moment of the climactic moment, and we'll get to, that's the most important part of this, but the sub part of it is that in this moment where Joseph reveals himself, Joseph is the one who is taking the initiative and saying to the brothers, you are coming down, and it's because of God. So I'm just going to put the text here before. He says, Ve'ata, do not be pained, do not let me be upset, for it was to save life that God sent me on before you. 2 years now in the famine. There's still another 5 years. So God sent me ahead of you to make a remnant for you. Now it was not that you sent me here, but God. Okay. And now here, Maharu va'alu elavi. You need to go up to my father, say to him, God has made me Lord of Egypt. You shall not stay in the region of you shall stay in the region of Goshen. You and your sons, I will sustain you. And this is the key line, verse 13. Tell my father of all the weight I carry in Egypt, make haste, bring him down here, bring my father down here. So in other words, what he's doing is he is taking the authority. I focused a lot in last week on the political dimensions of the family here, and I'm going to only just spend this moment on this, that in the political kind of confusion of the family where there's no leadership, Jacob told him to go down, and Judah and Reuben are rivals for power. And here it's Joseph who is basically saying, you need to come down. And it's not only because I'm telling you, but it's because I understand that it's God that put me here altogether. So in a way, he is kind of fusing both his own personal political leadership and also his understanding of the divine role here, notwithstanding the fact that God has not directly spoken, and those of us who are paying very close attention, we notice that throughout the stories of Joseph, Joseph refers to God as Elohim and not Adonai. Elohim and not Adonai. There's a reason for this. And the reason for this, I think, is very, very, very subtle, but makes so much sense when you think about it. The four-letter name of God, Yud He Vav He, Adonai, is a personal name. It's the intimate name of God. It's the name of God that God will be known as to the people. And the word Elohim is a much more universal word. And Joseph has been detached from the personal, intimate relationship with God. And Joseph is detached from any personal relationship with God because God doesn't speak to Joseph directly. God doesn't speak to anybody here, okay? God has stopped speaking. After Jacob, God doesn't speak to anybody until we get to Moses, all right? And it is here, Joseph is really understanding himself in a kind of universal way and presenting, a kind of, this is the sweep of history, the arc of history. I see myself within the larger context, and there are bigger flows in history right now, and I'm a part of that. I'm not part of the intimate bond here. I have a strong moral connection. I have a strong belief connection, but I don't have the same intimate connection that my ancestors had, and that's reflected in the way that Joseph talks about God. And so, just one line to conclude here: Joseph has taken the authority in the family, and unlike Abraham and unlike Isaac, Joseph is the one who is saying, it's because of me, but it's also because of God. So in a way, there's a fusion of both the personal self-starting and also divine instruction. I'll stop there. You got Nanette raising hand. Go ahead.
Okay. So, Rabbi, I feel a tiny bit confused. I feel tangled, actually. So, yes, this whole thing is dramatic. Yes, Joseph interprets the dream, blah, blah. It's very incredible. But wasn't it God that wasn't it God that was involved with Jacob on the pillow when Jacob dreamt about the ladder? Wasn't it God that sort of intervened with the angel and had Jacob have the dream, and he wrestled, and he became Israel. And wasn't it Jacob that interpreted the first dream of Joseph,
No.
about the stars and the moon? So I'm
So
I
let me
feel like I'm a
try
mess here.
and sort this out. I'll make it clear. So God does appear to Jacob in the dream that you cited, the dream of the ladder, the dream of the raised platform, however, the angels going up and down. God speaks to Jacob. God speaks to Jacob in a dream. God speaks to Jacob, in all of those scenes. Okay, and when God wrestles, when Jacob wrestles with the angel or the messenger or whatever, the mysterious assailant, we don't know the identity of it. It's not God, but he does say this, that he wrestles with God, and we naturally gravitate to that idea that here is the one who wrestles with God. But there is a huge difference. It's almost like you could draw the boundary line in the terms of the development of the story. God speaks directly to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in all sorts of different forms and all sorts of different media. God does not speak to Joseph. Joseph dreams, but those dreams do not include God said, or this is what God shows. Joseph interprets the dreams and says, I think, or this is what God is showing. It's Joseph saying this, but it's not God doing that, which means that us as the readers make the following conclusion: that things are happening here in the story. It's almost as if they're happening based on human decisions, but there seems to be a way that people are perceiving, let's just call it the divine hand. That is to say that God is acting. God is acting, and this is what makes the Bible the Bible. It's that human beings are in every place here choosing how to behave, but there is behind this the perception that there is a divine hand. Ilana, go ahead. Unmute. Press the space bar. Just press the space bar. Go.
I think it's very impressive that Joseph is so forgiving. So I'm trying to figure out, why is he like this? What was done to him was awful and terrible, and his behavior is so positive and so nice. Is it what it is, or what?
Well, I think that we have to look carefully, and I'm going to use the comment, your question, to look very carefully to see whether or not he's being, careful and nice, or whether there's still a lot of tension between them. And it's a good way of asking the question in the story: what is the resolution in the relationship? We know the tension. The tension is very palpable. He knows who he is, but they don't know who he is. He's been reminded of who he is to them. And all of this is taking place in this kind of context. And so the extent to which Joseph, how forgiving he will be to them, I think is a question that we're going to have to hold to analyze as the story unfolds. Don't forget, spoiler alert a lot of, which is at the end of the story when Jacob dies. That's next week's Parsha. Then the brothers are really worried that they're gonna be punished because there's the father is no longer there. So the brothers make up a story that our father asked for forgiveness, and I think part of the joy, the beauty of reading these stories is we really never know clearly, and it's always up to us to interpret, to what extent he is forgiving them and not. And to a certain extent, it may be our projection onto the story, because we all see ourselves mirrored in the story some way, and am here, I'm going to say, if we are generally forgiving people, patient and kind, we're going to see, I think, the kinder element in this. If we tend to be, holding grudges and vindictive, then we're gonna see Joseph very much mirrored in our own image, I think. Bob said, it's interesting that Joseph and the brothers are now communicating with each other directly without any dreams intervening. Is there any significance to this? Yes, absolutely. And that's a really good point. The point is that there are the story, and I'll show you now in a second, is about how boundaries are dissolving and where the boundaries are. Before that, John, then we'll go.
Well, Joseph says he forgives them, but he, at the same time, is asserting his power over them. And when he talks to them, you even get the sense of what he was like when he was younger. He was,
I say there's a lot of Joseph. There's a lot of old Joseph in this scene here. I think there's a lot of new Joseph. At least I would want to see that. I would want to see that there's been some transformation. Look, he was 17 and now he's about 39. So 22 years have taken place. You would think that a person develops over the course of 22 years in terms of both maturation, understanding, and wisdom. And so the portrait I would give of Joseph is that Joseph understands things a little more, but there's still a little bit in him. And the other thing I would say is he was a person who dreamed dreams at the beginning when he was 17. But it's very interesting that after the first scene in which he dreams dreams, he no longer has any dreams that are reported to us. What is reported to us are dreams of others: the butler, the baker, Pharaoh. Okay? 3 other people have dreams. Joseph no longer has dreams. Joseph, at the beginning of the story, talks and talks and talks and talks and talks. But by the middle of the story, he listens and listens and listens. I think that there is transformation in that, from being a talker to being a listener. And that's another line to observe, that the development of the character takes place when the character does more listening than talking. Okay?
could I just say one more thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
He associates himself with God. He's the spokesman for God. That's quite an assertion. He says it to Pharaoh, and he says it to his brothers, like, God doesn't speak to him, but he speaks as if God speaks to him.
I think you're onto something there, which is that it's not, I wouldn't say it's megalomania, but it's both I think an understanding. It's an expression of self-understanding and an expression of self-aspiration. Okay, we do have God being with Joseph. It's very interesting, where the name of God as Yud-Heh Vav-Heh appears. It appears in one place only, and this is kind of fascinating to observe. When Joseph is sold to Potiphar, it says, "Vahi Adonai et Yosef," that God was with Joseph. Vahi ish matzliach v'kol hu oseh Adonai matzliach b'yado. God, 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 God. Lots of God there, about 5 or 6 times that the name of God is mentioned in that chapter only, and nowhere else. So you could say that Joseph has the experience, in the moment of distress, he has experience of something with him, of the divine presence with him. Okay, I will make this as a kind of sermonic statement, which is, when the 23rd Psalm says, Even in the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff to comfort me. You know, it's gam ki lo yirara ki ata ima, you are with me. We can't underscore how important that statement is as a statement of faith. That and this is the experience that people in distress have had, you know, as a religious experience, which is, I may have been alone, I may have been in suffering, I may have been in terrible, terrible pain, but even when I was alone, even when I was in pain, even when I was in the valley of the shadow of death, I felt God's presence with me. I felt God with me. So I'm giving that as a charitable reading of Joseph, that Joseph has this experience of deep, deep, deep loneliness, the deep experience of brutalization as the hostage. And here, again, I point this out because we're close to that experience right now in watching things unfold in Israel and being so attentive to the plight of the hostage. And I'm sure there are among them people who feel, with whatever faith they have, that they're not being abandoned, that while the world has abandoned them, that God still has not abandoned them. It's very, very difficult, I'm sure. And we haven't had that kind, or at least I haven't heard that kind of statement yet from the hostages, in terms of what they feel and what how their faith, or what was their faith in this moment. But as dark as the experience was, it's always the feeling of abandonment. So Joseph feels abandoned by everybody else, but he is aware through his success that he's not being abandoned by God. And so on the one hand, it may appear to us that he has a little bit of, arrogance still, or a little bit of, claim to this divine, being an oracle, basically. On the other hand, he is an exceptional person, and he does have talent. It's almost like saying, and I'll put it to you this way, which is, you take I guess Leonard Bernstein is the character of the week, in terms of gifted people. Okay, so you take a Leonard Bernstein, who is a magnificent, amazing, gifted, impresario, a tremendous conductor who has such deep insight of music. And on the one hand, there has to be humility. On the other hand, there has to be a kind of, I'm aware, I know that I have this talent. I know that God gave me talent, right? So, a Michael Jordan, is humble on one level. I work and work and work and work, but I also know that I have tremendous talent. So I have to learn how not to lord over others with that talent. I think that's the key struggle within a celebrated person, how to still remain humble. And Joseph, I think he does okay. Go ahead, Susie, and then Annette.
Also, a little bit of Egypt rubbing off on him, because Pharaoh is kind of like a god or a godlike personage, and he's next to Pharaoh. So he's like one step away
Right?
from.
How does that not go to your head, right? And so I think this is a tension that he has. As I said, I think it's the tension that all prodigies have, all super talented people have. They from the minute they understand that they have incredible talent, the whole world is saying, "Oh, you're amazing, you're amazing, you're amazing, you're amazing," and so it could go to your head, right? And you can think you're amazing. And so you need to be reminded that you're not, or you need to be reminded that you're not. It's an extraordinary human gift to be able to understand that you're just an ordinary person. And I think he navigates okay. He has to be able to convey to the brothers that there is a broader plan. You just can't say to them, come down here. He has to present it to them as part of a larger drama. Nanette, go ahead.
So, what do you think about this idea? I love everything you said, but this line is to me is super and powerful. God said to Jacob, "Do not be afraid to go to Egypt, for it is there that I will make you a great nation."
Yeah,
I mean,
that comes
that's like
later. Yeah. And
that's a big deal. So,
the-
is it possible that God knew all along Jacob was going to go, but he didn't want to go, so he had to come up with this whole plan to get Jacob to go?
well, the answer is yes. This has already been, revealed to Abraham. Abraham, back in chapter 15, God has a covenant in a dream with Abraham, basically, and says, "You shall certainly know that your children will go down. They will be down. They will." God does say this, and so the reader of the Bible, namely you and I, us, all of us, we have already been kind of preempted to understand that the experience of servitude, slavery, is going to happen. I think part of the plot device, if you will, is really, how is that going to happen, and how will the people be enslaved? And here we are right at that point where here's how they're going to get to Egypt. They got to Egypt because of a famine. And it's because of the famine that they stayed in Egypt. And they stayed there comfortable until such point as they were expropriated or exploited, in the book of Exodus. All of this does set up the children of Israel to prosper and to flourish, but there's going to be a nagging tension here, which is God has promised the land to them, and while they are still outside the land, that promise will not be fulfilled, and therefore they will need to experience again. They will have to go back. Now, how will they go back? They'll go back as free people. And that, I mean, I don't want to make too much of a statement, although it is the kind of theme of the Bible, which is you need to be free. A Jew is a free person, and that it's God who redeems you. God frees you. God is the one that, by saving you from slavery, makes you free, literally gives you life from death. All of these themes are so important. Look, even Joseph says it here. Joseph says, Ki lemichya, I brought you down to save your life. And notice, last week it said, V'nichya v'no lamut, you will live and not die. You will live and not die. And the last commandment of the Bible is, you shall choose life. So all of these things are touching that theme. The theme is that people want to live. People want to live. And Joseph understands it's at this point, it's not articulated. At the end of Deuteronomy, it will be articulated very clearly, choose life. But here, the characters are making those choices, and they are demonstrating the choice of life, as difficult as it is. And I've pointed out to the fact that it's very ironic for a person like Jacob to say, we'll live and not die, because he's living as a shadow and a terribly depressed person, right? Here's a person who says, we got to go down to Egypt to buy food so that we live and not die. And the brothers look at them and saying, like, look at this guy. Look at this guy. He's been, living as a shadow of himself for the last 20 years. And on and on. There are lots and lots of ironies there. But the point is, in the end, yeah, it's about life. Ruth.
So this is something that just occurred to me now for the first time. So there were 7 years of plenty, and Joseph was in charge of, guarding the surpluses. And then there was 7 years of famine. And then presumably, since Joseph's dreams come true, after the 7 years of famine, things went back to normal. So this is before a Pharaoh arose that did not know Joseph.
Correct.
So
yes.
Why did they not, once the famine was over, why didn't everybody return?
It's a great question, and that I think is the question that is taken up. It's not taken up in next week's Parsha, but the tension of wanting to stay in Egypt is present there. It's Joseph. Joseph says, "Stay there. I will take care of you, and you will be there, and you will you will subsist here based on me, and that becomes the strong desire. And I've heard some Israeli teachers focus in on this and say this is the diaspora mentality, right? This is when you have it good and they had it good, you don't realize what you're giving up, and therefore you need to it becomes a crisis where you all of a sudden are struggling again. And so that's it's very useful. The point is that they become used to it. They acclimatize to Egypt. They assimilate in some way to Egyptian. And they, of course, remain differentiated from Egyptian culture. They're useful to Egypt in some ways. But they're also, I think, paralyzed. And here I'll return to this theme, which is that there is a certain political paralysis after Joseph. Joseph is such a colossal figure because he determines where everybody's going to live. And the political center of gravity shifts from Jacob to Joseph. After Joseph's death, it doesn't tell us where the political center of gravity is for the people. We would think that, okay, the tribal structures and the clan leaders and the heads of that they probably have some legitimate power within the family, but we don't have a central figure who is the head of the family, and it shows because the family makes disastrous decisions as a family, and resulting in their enslavement. It will take someone outside the family structure to create a new political structure, and that will be Moses. Look at this. Moses, just on that theme, Moses is adopted by the Egyptian Pharaoh, essentially the prince of Egypt, and is outside the family structure, and will be necessary as an outsider to gain legitimacy to lead the people, to be the political leader of the people. John. Unmute.
Things don't go back to normal for the Egyptians. There's one part of this that doesn't get much emphasis, but Joseph basically pauperizes the Egyptian people.
Population, yeah.
Yeah, they're turned into serfs because in order to get food, they have to, give up their animals, all their property. They become serfs. And this is under Joseph. And it's great for Pharaoh, makes him rich, but it's not good for the Egyptian people. And I'm just wondering, is there some causal relationship between what the Egyptian people thought of Joseph as a Hebrew to the subsequent enslavement of the Israelites? And maybe there was such political hatred among the people, the Egyptians, of the Israelites, that it kind of forced the hand of the Pharaoh to move against them.
So it's a great observation. I wouldn't give them that much credit, or I wouldn't. In a way, it's almost like saying, did they deserve it? Right? This is in a sense, they brought it on themselves. The Israelites brought on their suffering because of Joseph's policies. Let's just say it didn't help, okay? But the fact that Pharaoh turns on them is not necessarily caused by the antipathy that the population may have had to Joseph. The way that the text at the beginning of Exodus reads is that, there was a Pharaoh who did not know Joseph. Asher lo yada et Yosef. And of course, we can read into that lots and lots of different meaning. Yada didn't recognize, didn't know, didn't understand, and had no allegiance to Joseph. After all, Joseph enabled, and as the story is told here, Joseph enabled the pharaonic household to survive. Joseph averted a crisis. Joseph averted a catastrophe. And so it may be that Pharaoh, this Pharaoh who arises in Exodus, is a different Pharaoh in the sense that he says, I'm going to exact policies for my time and for my concerns. And what does he see there? He sees that this people that were brought down as a family is now a nation, and he's threatened by it. Now, if Pharaoh doesn't know Joseph, and this is a couple hundred years after Joseph, the people that he rules, the ordinary Egyptians, also have no direct living memory of the Joseph policies. They may have survived various states of destitution, and they may have a kind of their own folkloric memory of that, but they're not. In fact, the Egyptians, the regular Egyptians in the Exodus story, are kind of, I wouldn't say they're totally benevolent, but they're not as antipath. They don't have as much antipathy to the Israelites as we would think. We tend, when we read the story, we tend to make them into Nazis. They're not. They're also oppressed by an oppressive ruler. Look, in the end, they're whether you read this with sarcasm or with with a sense of, well, that's what the Torah says. At the end, when they send out the Israelites, the Egyptians give them clothing, they give them things. Okay. Now, one way of reading it is to say, well, the Israelites simply borrowed them, they took them. But another way of saying it is that no, there was actually a bit of benevolence between the populations, and that they understood that the Israelites were enslaved, and they understood that the Israelites were now leaving. Not only that, but the plague of the firstborn was disastrous for them, and they realized that maybe it's a good thing that they would leave, and so let's help them out a little bit. So the point is that we could read it either way. That the Egyptian population may be may have some xenophobia, let's just say that, some dislike of this group. On the other hand, they were a group like any other group until such time as Pharaoh oppressed them. And the reason why Pharaoh oppresses them, and here I will read this, as a kind of proto-anti-Semitism, Pharaoh oppresses them because he fears them, and it says that pretty clearly, that this here is a people that is becoming so they might rise up against us. That's a tremendous fear, and that fear is the root of the anti-Semitism. Okay, let me just go into the text here. I want to just take you into the first couple of verses here. The scene is so moving and so evocative when it says, Joseph could no longer restrain himself in the presence of all who were stationed around him. Okay, so we have, I was looking for scenes of like the Oval Office, right? Whether, the Oval Office has been depicted so many times in movies. And there must be a scene in some movie where there's an entourage of people, and then the principal says, I need to speak to the president personally, right? I need to get everybody out. And I was looking at the movie Elvis and Nixon. I don't know if you saw it. It's an interesting movie where it's all focused on Elvis Presley wants to meet President Nixon, and it's a very, very clever movie. It's droll with a lot of humor because both characters, Elvis and Nixon, are they in the popular imagination, they've become kind of caricatures of themselves. They're larger than life characters because of their tremendous vanity and weaknesses, okay? And it makes for an interesting scene. And so I was looking for the right scene in which Elvis says, get everybody out of here. I want to talk to the president personally. And that's kind of what's going on here, which is, but obviously with much more pathos, because Joseph is there, like any leader, there are people, there are attendants to him. There are all sorts of, there's an entourage, okay? There are secretaries and, stenographer. There's a whole bunch of people, lackeys also, and interpreters, okay? Because Joseph is speaking Egyptian, and these people are speaking a Canaanite dialect. So there must have been some people who were able to between Canaanite and Egyptian. That's a fascinating kind of historical archaeological question. And is the Rosetta Stone, I think, has Egyptian hieroglyphs and a Proto-Canaanite language on it. Anyway, so Joseph gets everybody out there, says, everybody leave me. That is to say, I don't want anybody in this room other than me and those men, the brothers, okay? So we have a room within a palace, within a country. There are, the scheme of this is that the country is beyond the boundary of the land of Israel. This is Egypt, beyond the Nile. We are in, the capital. We are in the palace. We are in a room. And in the room is the most private moment that is going to take place between Joseph and his brothers. Have everybody leave me. V'lo amad ish ito behit vada Yosef el achav. No one stood in attendance upon when Joseph made himself to his brothers. He's by himself with nobody there, okay? So space, where is this taking place? It's taking place in a very, very localized space, lots of boundaries. Who would be in there? That's Joseph and his brothers, the characters. The external boundaries, the boundaries of space, the boundary of the walls of the palace, and the boundary of the door of the room. And the familial boundaries, people outside the family are out. Only people inside the family are in, okay? And the boundary of inside and outside in terms of family is really, really important. Susie, you have a question. Go ahead.
Is this from, I remember remembering from last week, but isn't it in Joseph's house that they're
It's in
meeting?
Joseph's house, yes. Okay, not the royal, it's Joseph's palace, I'm sorry. Okay, so I was saying the family boundary is a very, very important. Look at the royal family, okay? I guess that has its own thing. The president's family, in the family moment, there's no one to convey to the outside world what's going on inside. I mean, it's an interesting narrative technique here, because a narrator is also present inside the room, right? This is the kind of sleight of hand, and the magic of storytelling is that while all this is taking place in the total privacy of the intimate disclosure of Joseph to his brothers, there's a narrator who's narrating this for us, okay? And so we get to see this, all right? And so now and then of course the internal boundary is something that we can't define, but Joseph has locked up all of his emotions. That's the wall. The real wall is not a room, and it's not a house, and it's not a country. But the real boundary is between my real self and my presented self. And when we go to this verse, he's saying, he can't restrain himself any longer. He can't maintain the psychic strength in order to preserve the boundary between his internal life and his external reality. And so I'm pointing this out because what makes this beautiful as literature is that the scene of all the different boundaries really reflects what's going on internally in the character, that the boundary is going to dissolve. And so he says, Vayiten et kolo b'vchi. I love it. It's just such a gorgeous expression. He put forth his voice in weeping, which is so unusual, as an expression in the Bible. Vayishma'u Mitzrayim. Egypt heard. Vayishma Beit Paro, and the house of Pharaoh heard. So all of the efforts that he made in making this private are to naught. It's a public moment of total disclosure. He's disclosed himself privately, but it's public to everybody. Okay, again, it's very theatrical. I put a highlight on Vayiten et kolo b'vchi, put his forth in weeping, and this is like a Chidon Tanakh question. Okay, where else do we have this expression of people, or a single, or it happens to be a group of people putting their voices in weeping, using the same expression? It says, "Vaytisa kol ha'ida vayitnu et kolam vayivku ha'am balayla hahu." Okay, you'll impress me if you get this. You'll certainly know this when I mention it to you. Okay, in Bamidbar, chapter 13, 14, it's the spies. What happens? The spies come back from the land of Israel, and they tell the people, no, we can't, it's a terrible land. It's full of giants. We're like grasshoppers there. And the people break down. They can't handle it. Vaytisa kol ha'ida vayitnu et kolam vayivku. The whole people cry in the same way, okay? And so here, the biblical language draws you to the connection. Here is Joseph crying for what the brothers do. In the scene in Book of Numbers, here is the people doing something because of what the later representatives of the brothers do. It's a kind of interesting connection, okay? Susie, go ahead.
It's a strange phraseology. Vayishma'u Mitzrayim, Vayishma Beit Paro.
That's right. Let's talk about that one now. I'm going to put it up here, okay? So, Vayishma'u Mitzrayim, Vayishma Beit Paro. First Egypt heard, and then Pharaoh's heard. So, Susie, give me your best interpretation of that.
So, well, I'm not sure what to do. So, you would think that it says the Egyptians heard. You would expect that to be Vayishma'u HaMitzrim, not Vayishma'u Mitzrayim. But it's sort of. So
maybe it's a translation quibble. I would Vayishma'u Mitzrayim. It would be Egypt heard, and
the translation is different. Yeah.
Yes.
Except that it's a plural verb.
Vayishma'u
Mitzrayim.
Yeah. Interesting. So that's a little bit of a puzzle, but I'm more drawn to the idea that there's a kind of telescoping here, okay? Which is
backwards. You would think that
okay
here first, and then the rest of Mitzrayim, because you go from in to out.
No, and this is the beauty of the way that the storyteller is telling it here. Is saying everybody hears, okay? The whole people are here. So now, at what point does the household of Pharaoh hear, and what's the significance of saying that line? And to me, this is the whole story, which is we have Israel inside the room, we have Egypt outside, and then we have somewhere down the road, the household of Pharaoh, okay? So those of you who are politically charged here or primed for the political story, you get it, which is there's now a household of Israelites here, and it's a kind of counterweight to the household of Pharaoh. Now, the household of Pharaoh is the superpower, and the household of Israel is a little power, okay? So what the narrator is setting up for us is, how is this little micro power going to function within the macro power, the superpower of Egypt. Okay, we have the Egyptians hearing, so we then have to ask ourselves a question, which is, well, they hear the crying. What if that? How does that happen, right? And how would they hear? Well, they would hear because Joseph's room is not hermetically sealed. It's not soundproof. There's
The other
someone
thing,
standing outside the door. Okay, it's like anything. I mean, I love when I watch Israeli news. Okay, they have reporters standing outside the caucus room of the party. Okay, and they're listening at the door. Okay, and if you listen, I mean, no matter how much you soundproof the room, they hear screaming. Okay, and if they hear screaming, they'll report and they say, Shamanu takot, Shamanu takot. They realize that it wasn't a thing. It's even worse, okay? Because inevitably there's someone in the room with a phone, okay? And there's someone recording the protocols of the meeting on the phone. And they go to their favorite reporter and they give them their phone. They leak the whole meeting, and you hear the whole meeting. That's a meeting supposed to be in private, on the recording of it. It's remarkable. Okay, it's very, very difficult in political structures to keep secrets. Okay,
also, now that I think of it, from what I said before, so they're in Joseph's house because
right.
he's
But
invited.
but he's kicked everybody out of the house. So
Pharaoh's house is down the road.
you can imagine when he kicks everybody out, they go, oh gee, I wonder what's going on in there. I wonder what's going on. And so he doesn't have people posted outside the door. So what are they doing? They're sticking their ear up to the door. But before, so the narrator is very clever here. Before the word gets to Pharaoh, the word gets to all of Egypt. Okay, so then because Joseph is a curiosity to them. Joseph is a celebrity leader to them, and they want to know everything about him. And so he stokes a lot of gossip. Then the fact that Pharaoh's household hears tells us something very, very interesting, which is, I think it opens up the question, which is, how is he going to deal with this? How is he going to deal? John, go ahead.
Well, it says they hear. It doesn't say they understand.
Ah, right. But it does say one thing, okay? And here, I mean, I know we're running out of time. It does say something here, okay? We're gonna gloss over the most important moment. I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? Okay, that's clearly not what we're dealing with, even though I would love to deal with that. Come close, come close, come close. But he says, look at the way that it's at the end of the whole thing, which is here we go. The news was heard in Pharaoh's household. Va'akol nishma bet paro. Ba'u achei Yosef, Joseph's brothers who come. Vayitav b'nei Pharaoh u'b'nei avadav. It was good in Pharaoh's eyes and the eyes of the servants. So this Jonathan Grossman, who I love to quote, writes in his commentary on this. We have a parallel structure in the story. At the beginning of the story, we mentioned Pharaoh's household. This is at the end of the scene. So the scene is told with such artistry. It's called chiasma, as we talked about many times. It's A prime, right? This is the balance here. At the end of the story, we have Pharaoh. Now, what does the significance of this at the end of the story? I've suggested that the minute Pharaoh hears it back at the beginning of the story, we don't know how it's going to resolve. We don't know, because it could literally go both ways for him. And if I were a despotic Pharaoh, okay, and my first minister has his family show up, if I were despotic, I would be really worried, because his family comes from Canaan, and I'd have to do some immediate political calculations. Is my most loyal servant going to stay loyal to me? And in what way will I be able to keep him loyal to me? I need him. Without him, I have no Egypt. He is indispensable to me. And so in this instance, as he is indispensable to me, I have a choice to make. Do I like this or do I not like this? If I don't like this, what am I going to do? I better like this, because if I like this, then it'll be better for me. Vayitav b'nei Pharaoh. So I'm giving a very political reading to this, that Pharaoh has to make a decision here. And his decision is, okay, I can be benevolent too. I need him. And no, don't forget that Joseph is elite. Joseph is married to the daughter of the high priest of, On, I guess. And he's well connected. So Pharaoh's calculations are that he has to find a way to accommodate the family. He has to find a way to get close to them in order to preserve the relationship with Joseph, and therefore in order to preserve the well functioning of the kingdom. What the worst thing for any leader is uncertainty and disruption, right? And he doesn't want to lose his first, and he's not so sure he's got someone as talented as Joseph. Today in contemporary politics, when the president fires or the chief of staff resigns, okay, you'll find another chief of staff pretty quickly, okay? It's not, it's when you don't have a chief of staff in the wings, that's when you really have to worry. And Pharaoh evidently did not have someone in the wings, and therefore he needed to be very, very benevolent to them. Bob, then we'll go.
Along with the political and interpersonal interpretation, I can't resist one of my favorite interpretations I read about some of these lines, and that is another connection to Hanukkah, which is the fact that Joseph comes down to the land of impurity and he resists it. And in fact, in order to convince the people to come down, from his family to come down, it's like convening all the different sects of Judaism. You got different frum communities, conservative, Orthodox, Reform, Reconstructionist, all coming down together to meet with each other. He's going to set aside Goshen as a little Lakewood or Highland Park or B'nai Brak for them to spend their time in. And they're going to kind of connect up with the fact that even though externally he may be dressed as an Egyptian, he in fact is revealing himself to the people that he has maintained this. And some of the interesting midrash that they were talking about were sending the wagons up afterwards and sending a message to Yaakov about the last halacha he was studying, as a way to let him know. So part of the question is this political also, which is sort of bringing people together and sort of saying, yeah, we've all got to come down and not just stay here. We've got to bring things to the world. And how are we going to survive, just like, instead of Hellenism, the Egyptification of society and assimilation? So it's really an anti-assimilation message that some people have interpreted this as. So I'm just curious.
So I look, we're going to play the refrain that you and I always have every week, which is, isn't it wonderful that there's so many ways to look at this? Okay. And Midrash has an agenda here. What's the agenda? The agenda is to find a story, a hidden story that may or may not be there, and which is to kind of educate and to convey to people a certain way of living. I disagree with it only in the sense that the story really doesn't say that. And I think the story's joy and beauty, deals with, it's like music, music is all about tension and resolution. And so in the story, there's tension and resolution, but there's still a lot of tension. And I'll give you one little fragment of it. When Joseph says, Ha'od avi chai, is my father still alive? That is a loaded question, okay? Because, we in the modern era, when we say the song, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Chai, Shlomo Karlbach, right? Am Yisrael, we say Od Avinu Chai, our father. But when Joseph says Ha'od Avi Chai, imagine you're a brother, you're Naphtali, and you hear Joseph say, is my father still alive? And Naphtali would say, who the are you to say that to take possession? He's our father. He's not your father. He's our father. What gives you the right to claim ownership of our father? And so the very fact that he says, have my father, is still a moment of tension. Not only that, but go read the rest of it, and it's tell him that his son, Beno, his son is in Egypt. Okay, his son is the ruler. His son is the father. His son. Whoa, wait a second. We're 12 sons here. He's not. You're not the only son, and so that is a residue of the pre-existing tension.
Yeah, and they say that in fact that may have been Joseph not trusting the brothers for what happened, and so there are multiple interpretations that I think are out there that the tension is definitely still there. And what does it even mean to be alive? Physically alive, spiritually alive, and all that
Sure. All that. Okay, John, last word.
Yeah, I just had one comment on Bob's statement that maybe the goal was to prevent Egyptification. I think that just the opposite happened, because all throughout the Exodus, they want to go back to Egypt. It's not so much getting Israel out of Egypt as getting Egypt out of the minds of the Israelites. So they didn't work if they wanted to prevent Egyptification.
Very nice, very nice. All right. Well, we'll have to leave it there. Now, I think next week we will not be having a class. But Monday the 1st of January, well, it's New Year. So I guess we're going to be off for 2 weeks, okay? So we're going to miss Vayichi and we're going to miss Shemot. That's too bad. All right. But we'll have to